All right, let's dive right in. We're unpacking this academic paper, Compliance of AI Systems. It's by Showning and Cruze. And it's all about, well, a pretty huge topic in machine learning right now. How do we actually guarantee that as our AI systems get more and more sophisticated, they're playing by the rules, so to speak?
Yeah.
You know, especially with big things coming down the line, like the EU's AI Act.
Right.
So these authors, they really zoom in on some of the biggest hurdles for achieving compliance.
Yeah.
Especially, you know, when you think about all those AI models running on devices with like limited computing power out there on the edges of networks. And they propose some really crucial first steps toward baking legal compliance into the entire, you know, life cycle of ML development. And this is where their focus on data gets really interesting. I mean, they make a strong case that the data itself, you know, the stuff we feed these AI systems, that's fundamental to building AI that isn't just powerful, but also trustworthy and transparent, which when you think about it are kind of the key ingredients if you want to meet both, you know, ethical and regulatory demands.
Absolutely. I think what's really compelling about this paper right off the bat is that it offers a very systematic examination of, well, what's quickly becoming a non-negotiable element of deploying machine learning systems. So they're taking a really direct look at the whole issue of AI compliance, putting, you know, both the EU AI Act and the question of training data legality front and center. And I think the challenges they highlight regarding edge devices, those devices, you know, distributed out there with their computational limitations are especially relevant now because we're seeing machine learning models moving beyond, you know, purely research environments and being embedded in all sorts of things in our everyday world.
Right.
Like think about smart sensors on factory floors or even the algorithms driving our cars.
Yeah, right.
So this platform-based approach they propose for guiding the development of AI that's both trustworthy and legally sound. This is a really significant contribution to how we should even be thinking about, you know, constructing the machine learning systems of the future.
Okay, let's break this down a bit. So the paper walks us through, it's like a 6-step process for machine learning development, right?
Yeah.
But they're also very specific about pinpointing exactly where considerations of compliance need to be factored in at each stage.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking everything from their first step, the data and application idea.
Yeah.
Which even at that level, the very idea you have, the data you think about collecting initially, they can already have legal ramifications. All the way down to deployment on embedded hardware, step 6.
Yeah.
You've got to have really clearly defined operational boundaries for that model that you're deploying out in the world.
Right.
Otherwise, you run into problems with things like adversarial attacks.
Yeah.
And, you know, you've got to be sure it's operating within its legal constraints. So as you go through these 6 steps, it's striking how the seeds of compliance are really planted right there from the get-go in that data and application idea phase.
Right.
It's not something you can just like slap on at the end as an afterthought. It's, you know, the legality of what you're even setting out to do, the data you consider at the start. These have really profound implications.
That's a really key point. I mean, if you connect this back to, you know, the bigger picture of what's happening in the field, developing machine learning systems. This isn't just you know, a purely technical endeavor anymore.
Right.
You've got this increasing integration of ML into, wow, just about every sector you can imagine, healthcare, finance, even law enforcement.
Right.
So these algorithms, they're not, you know, stuck in Kaggle competitions anymore. They're actually out there having a real impact on society and, you know, the economy. This shift, it demands that we move beyond just, you know, obsessing over accuracy and start thinking about the larger ethical and legal contexts. That's exactly where these regulatory frameworks, things like the EU AI Act, they come in.
Right.
They're a direct response to, well, to this growing societal impact.
And it's not just the people making the laws who are noticing this. Right?
Yeah.
The paper also points out this this increasing public skepticism surrounding AI.
Yeah.
So if we don't address these concerns about, you know, things like bias, fairness, and accountability head on, it could definitely slow down, you know, the widespread adoption of these technologies. It's interesting how the authors position explainable AI, or XAIs as it's often called. They see it as an early attempt to grapple with this need for understanding and trust in AI systems, even before we had this, this current wave of regulation.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the initial research into XAI was laying the groundwork for the more formal compliance frameworks that we're seeing come out now.
Yeah, that's right. They provide a really useful historical perspective on XAI, reminding us that, this desire to understand how complex systems work, the reasoning behind their decisions, this isn't new. But with the rise of, modern machine learning, especially these incredibly complex models like large language models, the need for robust XAI methods has become even more critical. So the paper, it helpfully categorizes these XAI techniques based on when they're applied in the machine learning lifecycle. They break it down into X-Ante, X-Nunc, and X-Post. And what's fascinating is how each of these stages addresses the compliance question from a different angle.
Right.
So you've got proactive measures taken before training even starts, real-time monitoring as the model is training, and then strategies for understanding decisions after the system has been deployed.
Okay, so walk me through those a bit more. So X-Ante, that's all about examining the data, before we even begin training the model.
Exactly.
And the authors really emphasize how crucial this step is for legal compliance, particularly, in light of Article 10.2 of the AI Act.
Right.
Which basically says that the quality and, legality of what you're putting into the system, the data, directly determines the quality and legality of what you get out, the AI system. It's like the ingredients determine the quality of the final dish. But here's the thing, with modern data sets being so massive, trying to find potential biases or legal red flags hidden in there before you even start training, that's a huge challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Then you have X-Nunc, which focuses on peering into the model's architecture as it's actually being trained.
Okay.
And analyzing the results as they come in. The goal is to understand how the model is making decisions by making, tiny changes to the inputs and seeing how the AI's behavior shifts in response.
Okay.
But as the paper correctly points out, teasing out true causal relationships from mere correlations in these very complex models, that's a big hurdle.
Right.
It's kind of like imagine trying to figure out how a super complicated engine works just by listening to, the sounds it makes.
Right, just by the noises.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about that last one, X-Post?
Right. So X-Post, that involves investigating the AI's decision-making process, its reasoning, the assumptions it's making, but doing all this after it's already been trained and is out there operating in the real world. This can be really helpful for confirming or refuting some of the insights that we might have gotten during the X-Nunc phase. But it also faces the inherent difficulty of, it's like trying to reverse engineer the thought processes of a really sophisticated machine learning model after it's, already learned all its patterns.
Right. So it's almost like, explainability through these XAI methods. It's essential.
Yeah.
But it's not the be-all, end-all when it comes to trustworthy AI.
And
right?
that's what I think is particularly insightful in the paper. They're arguing that, while explainability is a critical component for building AI systems that are trustworthy, it's not the only thing that matters, especially if you're concerned about legal compliance. Because trustworthiness, they argue, is a much broader concept.
Okay.
It's influenced by factors like comprehensibility, can people actually grasp how the AI works, legality itself, of course.
Right.
And then imputability, which is, that ability to actually pinpoint who or what is responsible for the actions of an AI system.
Right, to assign responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of these require us to, in a way, understand the AI's motives if we're going to properly evaluate its legal standing and whether it's complying with, with the rules.
Okay.
And they make a really important point about how these, XAI procedures, they have to be tailored to the specific audience who needs to understand, what the AI is doing and why.
Right. Because a developer needs to know different information than a regulator, than a user, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so this brings us to what I think is the heart of the paper, their big proposal. A platform-based approach to guide the development of machine learning systems, specifically ones that are going to be deployed on, resource-constrained embedded devices out in the wild. And they really want these systems to be both trustworthy and, legally compliant.
Right.
So the idea here is that this platform would be like a central hub,
right?
Where you bring together all the needs and expectations of different stakeholders, developers, regulators, users, everybody. And you integrate that with, the relevant regulations, technical standards, and norms right from the very beginning, from the conceptualization of the project.
Yeah.
It seems like a way to build compliance in from the ground up instead of, trying to bolt it on later.
Exactly. And the authors really highlight the challenges that that ML developers are facing right now, trying to navigate this world of AI legislation,
Right.
which, is complex and it's changing rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
So this platform aims to standardize, some of those technical parameters and provide legal assessments early on in the process. The ultimate goal is to catch any potential legal snags right at the beginning of the development lifecycle, which prevents, costly and time-consuming redesigns if you find out later that the system doesn't comply.
Right. It's about de-risking the whole process.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because for this initial legal assessment component of the platform, they make a really specific choice. They don't go with, the currently very popular large language models.
Right.
They argue for using what they call an expert system. And their reasoning is actually quite clever.
Yeah.
They point out that the legal landscape is, it's a moving target. It's constantly changing.
Right.
And they argue that an expert system would be much easier to oversee and update, to keep pace with those changes. Plus, and this is the clever legal maneuvering part, a non-autonomous expert system doesn't fall under, the definition of high-risk AI in Article 6 of the AI Act.
Right.
So you avoid this weird situation where an AI system that's supposed to be promoting trustworthiness could actually get flagged as high risk itself.
Right. Yeah.
It's a pretty neat way to, sidestep that potential problem.
It is. And if you consider the context of German professional law, particularly the Legal Services Act or RDG, there are limits on who can actually provide legal advice. So a more general expert system, one that gives guidance and flags potential issues without, actually offering specific legal counsel, that avoids those restrictions in a way that that a more autonomous LLM might not. It's about giving developers tools that are useful without, crossing any lines when it comes to providing legal advice, which is tightly regulated.
Right. So to show how this platform would actually work, out there in the real world, they give this really interesting industrial example, an AI system for assigning workers to different tasks based on live production data. And the authors immediately point out, a whole bunch of potential legal pitfalls, starting with the fact that such a system, because it has such a direct impact on workers' lives, it'd very likely be classified as, high risk under the AI Act.
Right.
And then there are, significant concerns around fundamental rights, like, potentially depriving someone of work or, impacting their working conditions negatively. So this is where that platform idea, it sounds great in theory, but are there downsides,
Yeah, that's a really important question. I think one immediate challenge that comes to mind is just the sheer complexity and variability of legal requirements across, different sectors, even different countries within the EU.
Right.
So to create a platform that can really address that level of nuance and provide, truly useful guidance without being too generic on the one hand or too specific on the other, where its applicability is limited, that's going to be a huge technical and legal undertaking.
Right.
Plus, making sure that expert system stays up to date with all those ever-changing, legal requirements.
Right.
That's going to require constant effort and expert oversight.
Yeah, it's not a set it and forget it type of thing.
No, definitely not.
And what about, actually getting companies to use it? Integrating this kind of platform into, existing machine learning development workflows. That's got to be a hurdle too, right?
Absolutely. There's always resistance to adopting new tools and processes, even if they're, beneficial in the long run.
Right, right. So going back to that worker assignment example,
right.
They specifically bring up Article 10, number 2, letter F, of the AI Act, which, it basically says you have to really scrutinize the training data to make sure there aren't any, potential health and safety risks or hidden biases like workload disparities or gender discrimination.
Right.
So in this scenario, an AI trained on historical data that, already has those biases built in, well, it could end up unfairly burdening certain workers or making decisions based on, on discriminatory factors. That's where that expert system in the platform, it could step in and proactively flag those risks really early in the process.
Right.
So the developers can go investigate their data and, fix any problems before they sink a ton of time and resources into training and deploying the model.
Yeah. And the legality of the training data itself, that's another really important aspect that the paper explores in detail. Because you can have a machine learning model that's technically brilliant, performs really well, but if it's been trained on data that, violates fundamental rights, like, say, images of people who haven't given their consent well, the entire AI system is compromised from a legal perspective, no matter how impressive it might seem on the surface. And given how huge many modern data sets are, manually checking every single piece of data for its legality just isn't feasible.
Right.
So the platform they envision would include, automated methods for this. They point to existing systems used in Germany to check for image rights violations, under their specific laws.
Okay, so their solution is basically, you need a two-pronged approach to building trustworthy AI systems.
Yeah.
First, they say you got to bring those legal considerations into the mix right from the get-go. Developers need to be thinking about legal requirements from the very beginning.
Right.
And the platform, the hope, is that it would, make those initial legal assessments easier, less of a burden.
Right.
Then second, they argue, we have to broaden how we think about trustworthiness itself. Take into account the different expectations of all those stakeholders. Things like comprehensibility for the people who are actually going to be using the AI.
Right.
And verifiable legality for those regulatory bodies who have to, assess compliance, which might mean, beefing up those X-Nunc procedures we talked about, so you have more solid, auditable proof that the system is sticking to the legal standards.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important to step back for a second and look at, the whole trajectory that's brought us to this critical point in the world of machine learning. A lot of that early AI research was fueled by, curiosity, the desire to understand these systems at a theoretical level. But as those technologies matured, they started to move into real-world applications. They became part of our everyday lives. And the need to establish, some kind of ethical and legal framework, well, it became impossible to ignore. And it's interesting that this XAI research, it actually predates specific laws like the EU AI Act, which shows you this inherent human need to understand and trust these systems, even before we had formal regulations in place.
Right.
So this push for comprehensive AI compliance, like what Showning and Cruze articulate so well in this paper, it feels like a natural and frankly necessary next step in the development of this technology, which is obviously, incredibly transformative.
Right. Absolutely. So I think the key takeaways from this deep dive are really clear. Compliance, it's not optional anymore, especially with the EU AI Act coming into effect. And the legality and quality of that training data, that's the foundation of everything. If you want to build trustworthy AI, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
And while explainability is a crucial tool for understanding how these systems work, it's not a magic solution.
Right.
It doesn't automatically guarantee trustworthiness or legal compliance on its own. And finally, this platform-based approach that Showning and Cruze are proposing, with its emphasis on early legal guidance and addressing the needs of all those different stakeholders, it's a really promising way forward.
Yeah. And it raises a really interesting question, building on what they've laid out in this framework.
Okay.
What are some of those, less obvious or more forward-looking research areas that this work could open up in the world of, machine learning and AI regulation?
That's a great point. So it's time for our Novel Notions segment.
Right.
And I've actually been thinking about a couple of ideas that stem directly from this paper and its insights. The first one has to do with something I'm calling adversarial legal attacks.
Adversarial legal attacks.
Yeah. So picture this. You've got these, malicious actors out there, and they're intentionally creating training data that's, problematic. But it's subtle. So you might have data sets with embedded biases that are designed to trigger really specific, obscure legal clauses. And they inject this data into, machine learning development pipelines.
Okay.
But their goal isn't to make the AI perform badly in a traditional sense,
Right.
It's to sabotage its legal standing so it ultimately fails compliance checks or, faces legal challenges after it's already out there being used. So you could imagine research focusing on, how to detect and neutralize this kind of legal poisoning of data sets.
Right.
Maybe combining anomaly detection methods with, some sophisticated semantic analysis that can pick up on the legal implications hidden within the data.
Interesting.
And think about the impact this could have on companies. They could be facing huge, unexpected legal hurdles because of training data that on the surface seemed fine, but had these hidden problems.
Yeah.
And as we see more and more regulatory scrutiny around AI, the chances of these kinds of attacks happening, while maybe low now, I think they could definitely increase.
Yeah, that's a really thought-provoking and honestly kind of unsettling prospect. It highlights a potential, second-order effect of all this AI regulation that we might not immediately think about. My novel notion builds on what the paper says about, both legal compliance and the importance of explainable AI.
Okay.
Right now, so much of the research on XAI focuses on explaining how AI systems work to end users and to the developers themselves.
Right.
But what about the regulators? They have very specific needs, right?
Oh,
they
right.
need to understand exactly why an AI system is considered compliant or not, according to very specific articles and clauses in the relevant laws. So this leads to the idea of legal explainability for regulators.
Okay. Legal explainability for regulators, or LER.
Yeah, exactly. Future research could explore XAI techniques specifically designed for this.
Okay.
Imagine AI systems that can generate compliance reports. These reports would not only explain how the AI makes its decisions, but also explicitly link those decisions and the underlying data, the model architecture, to the exact clauses in, the EU AI Act or other relevant legislation.
So you'd have a tool that could automatically generate human readable justifications for why the system is or isn't legally sound.
Yeah.
That would be incredibly helpful for regulators who have to audit these systems.
Exactly. It could be a really valuable way to bridge that gap between, the really technical side of AI development and the legal oversight that's absolutely essential for responsible innovation.
Fascinating. Both of those novel notions, they really highlight how, the challenges around AI compliance, they're evolving, they're complex, and there's still a lot to uncover. We've only just scratched the surface here. And the work by Showning and Cruze, it gives us a really solid foundation for, continuing this discussion.
Yeah.
Which is, obviously crucial in the field of machine learning right now.
For sure.
And for those of you who want to dig into this topic even further, you can find a link to the full paper in the show notes down below.
Great discussion.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Indeed. Lots to think about. Until next time.